With just days to go before the election, welcome to another edition of Faith on the Record, where we give people of faith, the news makers and the news breakers, the chance to get their views across on the stories behind the headlines. I'm Nick Stewart, president of Odyssey Networks, and today I'm joined by some of the best religious journalists in America as we dig down into the fantastic topic of religion and politics.
Hi, I'm Michelle Borstein. I'm the religion reporter at the Washington Post newspaper, and I cover religion in the Washington area and religion as it pertains to politics and policy and that kind of thing.
Okay, and Kevin?
I'm Kevin Ekstrom. I'm the editor-in-chief of Religion News Service here in Washington, D.C.
And Azra, finally.
Hi there. My name is Asra Namani. I'm a former reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and I've written a book called Standing Alone, An American Woman's Struggle for the Soul of Islam. I write a lot on issues of Islam for the Daily Beast.
Well, a wealth of expertise and insight there, and you've all been covering the election. But I want to start off very briefly. What's made this election worth covering for you as journalists? What's interested you the most? Michelle?
I just think this has been such a surprising election from a religious standpoint. You really see how American religion is in so much flux. It's very hard to predict. I mean, obviously, for example, how much people are or are not talking about Mormonism, how much African Americans care or don't care about things like gay marriage, whether votes like the evangelical vote or the Jewish vote are changing. I just think this is a period where Americans are definitely changing a lot of the sort of the conventional wisdoms about their identity. And I think you can see that, and it's been very hard to predict aspects of how religion played out this year for me.
That's one of the most exciting things. I agree. The normal rules, the normal expectations seem to be breaking down. So Kevin, you've been covering this on a day-to-day basis. What's it been like for you?
Well, yeah, I think Michelle's right that the rules and the definitions have shifted a lot this time around. This has not been an overtly religious election like we've seen in the past. There was no George W. Bush, Jesus is my favorite philosopher kind of talk. But I think we had some really interesting discussions about morality and moral values, and what constitutes moral values has really shifted from things like abortion and gay marriage to issues of national debt, and most recently the question of rape, and whether or not a rape is or can be God's will, which was sort of the most fascinating discussion that I saw this time around. So, there are different debates, different definitions this time around than what we've seen in the past.
Azra, you don't necessarily cover this topic every day. You have more of a chance to look back and absorb. What's your analysis of this particular election?
Well, I say this also as an immigrant to this country, as a Muslim, a minority religion in this country, that I do agree that, and I do believe that we're in this era of sort of religion 2.0 in America. The first period, 1.0, was this time when it was white Christian identity related to issues of religion in this and ethnicity in this country. But now, just as we've been talking about, there's now questions about minority religions, about the role of minorities in this country. The Hispanic vote is also, up for grabs, and that enters into a new era of thinking about what it means to be an American, even where our color, our race, our religion, all of these different issues end up becoming challenges, I think, to the conventional definition of what it meant to be an American, just like Michelle was saying. And so I think it's a really exciting time. I mean, it's one in which I can see inside the Muslim community, they're trying to figure out, how can we weigh in? How can we actually make an impact? We don't have to all just consider ourselves marginalized, but we can actually try to come up with our own questions for the debate. And so there's some really neat conversations going on that I think have been really fun to follow.
Traditionally, in the last few elections, it seemed the religious right, the evangelical religious right, has dominated things. But who do you think has been the star player looking across the denominations and faiths this time? Who's taken the headlines? Michelle?
Well, I mean, I would agree if you look at, I'll just say as an aside, people who identify still as evangelical, when you actually think about the size of their vote and the fact that they are largely not changing, they don't seem to be statistically changing their vote, they still are dominant. I mean, in terms of, being an incredible force, even though maybe people aren't reading as much about them. But they're still, a fifth or a quarter of the country, and they still vote, overwhelmingly Republican when they actually go in the voting booth at the end of the day. But anyway, I mean, I think we have written a lot about, what we call religious nuns, non-denominational. These are Americans that are, a fifth of Americans that don't really say they have a particular religious identity. And we're just really studying them this election. It seems like.
And what about the Catholics?
Catholics,
again, as
course,
someone
right.
coming in from another culture, this time I've been blown away, really, by the way the Catholics have seemingly tried to seize center stage. Maybe it's their Archbishop Dolan, but.
Yeah. I think it's the structure. I was going to say the non-denominational types, and also obviously we've all been writing a lot about the Catholic Church. I think that has to do with the fact that, first of all, they have this hierarchy, so you have this back and forth between what their hierarchy is saying and then what, tens of millions of people are doing, which is quite different often. And also that flux. They've been a swing vote for many years now. And it's just interesting, I think, for a lot of Americans who don't have that kind of structure to see the way people so strongly identify as Catholic, and yet what that means to them and how that affects their vote is so different from Catholic to Catholic.
Kevin, what about you when you've been covering it? Because, Archbishop Dolan is box. There he was, benediction at both the conventions. So, Kevin, how did it strike you? The Catholics came out of the trap, like lightning this time.
Yeah, well, Michelle just stole what I was going to say. But, Catholics, and again, get back to this idea that things are different this time around than they have been in the past. Catholic bishops in the hierarchy, have always been big on issues of gay marriage and abortion being the biggest one. This year, it took a different tack in the religious freedom or religious liberty question, where they are sort of openly hostile to the Obama White House. Now, there has always been a great amount of tension between the Catholic hierarchy and the Democrats over abortion. This year, it exploded onto a whole new level where you actually have lawsuits being filed between individual bishops and dioceses and Catholic colleges and Catholic-owned businesses suing the administration over contraception, but really at the heart of it is the fight over abortion. And I think, the degree to which the Catholic hierarchy has gotten involved in a very partisan way without being partisan was really kind of one of the takeaways from this year. But whenever you're talking about the Catholic Church, particularly the Catholic Church in America, you need to make a distinction between the hierarchy and the people in the pews. And they're, as Michelle noted, they are not often the same thing. And so you have the bishops waging a very political battle on the national scene, but that's not necessarily translating down to the parish level. There's obviously some parishes and some Catholics who get animated by this, but not everyone. And I think, one of the really interesting voices to emerge on the scene this year was that of Catholic nuns. They've always been working in hospitals and schools and social services, but this year, at least a lot of them came out kind of as equally partisan for the Democrats. Nuns on the bus touring across the country, all set against this backdrop of the Vatican investigation of the nuns. So I think, the increasing partisanship of the hierarchy combined with the newfound gumption among the nuns is really kind of fascinating.
So in some ways, Kevin, it's the year of the nuns, the election of the nuns, both the nuns who are not affiliated and the nuns of the religious orders. And Azra, I wanted to throw that to you to see what you made of that phenomenon, the nuns on the bus, the nuns lining up and being vocal, as well as asking you about Islam's role in the Muslim community in this election.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the nuns emerged is awesome. I mean, I have to say that, I've got my sort of money in their corner, and I'll admit that bias, because, they are the sort of in the trenches in the Catholic community, and to see them being targeted by the Vatican was something that I think struck a lot of folks. And the fact that they actually stood up and dared to, express themselves is really cool. The fact that we haven't even brought up the issue of Mormons, in the community, to me is my takeaway for one of the big winners from this election. No matter who wins on Tuesday, Mitt Romney or President Obama, I think the Mormon Church will have emerged a winner out of this election, much like the Catholic Church did when John F. Kennedy ran. I grew up in West Virginia, and West Virginia was a big state back in 1960 on whether they were going to accept a Catholic, right, as a presidential candidate. And the fact that the Mormon faith was not mocked or targeted, and that Mitt Romney was able to transcend his religious faith, I think was pretty big success for minority faith inside of this country. I'll be honest, when the election began, I did not think that this country and most of the churches and the people of this country would accept a Mormon candidate. I thought theologically that it would be so far a departure from traditional church doctrine that they would not be able to get past it. But wow, he pulled it off.
I was going to say, Azra, nobody had mentioned Mormons, and then you did. So
Yeah.
I want to run with that for a bit. And Michelle, ask you, I mean, do you agree with Azra that perhaps the winners, if there are winners for a religion or denomination in this election, is the Mormon Church?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I agree with everything Oscar said that, the strategy of the Romney campaign to just not speak at all about his religion, which is remarkable considering that, what a devout and active Mormon he is, did prove to be, I mean, they read Americans right, which is, I mean, I think I went to see the Book of Mormon on Broadway. And I mean, to me personally, I don't know if everyone disagrees with that, I think that shows that Americans do not have much tolerance for Mormonism when they really think about it, because they mocked. I mean, it's incredible. It just blows my mind that I felt awkward even sitting in that theater. So I think the fact is that there was no benefit to him to try to explain his faith beliefs. So in a sense, I mean, it's interesting also to say as a Muslim maybe that religious minorities think this is a good thing because it's sort of a step towards an inevitable acceptance that this is what we have to go through. But I mean, I think it's obviously sad in a sense. I mean, covering, I've done not a ton of stories about Mormons, but I've done a good number of them. And there is such a protective, defensive shell still around this community.
I want to see if I can grow that point, Michelle. We've been talking about the way there wasn't a great deal of discussion, maybe, frontline news about the Mormon faith in the election. So, Kevin, let me turn to you. What struck you about the way the parties have dealt with religion? I think perhaps I was feeling there'd be a lot more of it, but they seem to have been a bit quiet.
They have, especially the Democrats. There was all this talk in 2008 when Obama won the first time, that the Democrats had sort of found religion finally, or had figured out a way to talk about it. And there was a very aggressive, very muscular outreach to religious groups, particularly groups that Democrats had trouble with, like Catholics and evangelicals. And they actually did pretty well. This year, it has been anemic at best. There's no discernible, really muscular religious outreach from the Obama campaign. I mean, there's a presence there, but honestly, it's pretty weak.
I wanted to ask you specifically about that because, again, the adage that I pick up is that the Republicans are the party of religion, and the Democrats aren't. Now, did the Democrats do anything to change that, or do they make things worse?
Yeah, they probably actually made it worse when they had the flap at their convention this summer about taking all references to God out of the party platform. I mean, that was just, frankly, kind of silly and stupid, and I don't know why they did it, but they did. But, this, I think the Democrats looked at this election, and they knew that evangelicals, they weren't going to get them back. They had lost that community, and to spend time trying to go after them would be kind of a waste of time and money. They would maybe try to hold on to what they had, but they weren't going to go after them in an aggressive way. Instead, I think what both parties have been working on is really working to motivate their base, because both bases had problems this time around, where you had a bunch of Democrats who were rather dispirited and maybe a little bit disillusioned and disappointed with the president, but if they could convince them to vote, they would. And then on the Republican side, you had a bunch of evangelicals who were never really in love with Mitt Romney ever, and that's because of his politics, but also his faith. But I think both parties sort of, instead of looking outward to try to broaden their base, they wanted to turn inward to motivate their base. And really what this is going to come down to is a turnout election and which party is able to get their folks to the polls in the biggest numbers.
Ezra, I want to bring you in here. Again, picking up on Kevin's point, trying to motivate their base and get them there. Let's take something specific. Obama and the black churches and the black vote. In the last election, Obama drew 95% plus of the black vote. Now, he needs that again. But does his coming out so strongly in favor of gay marriage, as he has done in this election, alienated the black churches, who traditionally have got their people out there and voting?
There's a wedge then between President Obama and the black churches and the black preachers because of this issue. But I think that it's a gamble that is also exciting to watch, because while there's an assumption of the religious vote, I think that some of the statistics that Michelle was talking about regarding like folks who just don't belong or don't affiliate with a religion also tells us that there's a group of people out here who really don't want to be defined by their religion and who want to perhaps be defined by larger social issues such as same-sex marriage, and that the issues of theology and religion and church membership or mosque membership or synagogue membership or whatever your membership may be go beyond it. And honestly, there were people that I heard that while the Democratic Party had taken that issue of God out of the platform, there are so many references to God and throughout the speeches that I heard from a lot of average folks who were actually repelled by that, because there is a philosophy in America also of folks who don't want to affiliate and who, and this atheist movement is growing also. And so in that way, I think that it's also an exciting reflection of our times.
So, Michelle, let me turn that to you. What Azra was saying about the growth of those who feel that God on the political platform is something that alienates them. You mentioned very early on in this program the fascination with the rise of the nuns, those without any religious affiliation. Do you think that was behind Obama's thinking when he made a calculation and went so public on supporting gay marriage, knowing he could alienate the black church base?
Well, I mean, we are, I'm saying something everybody here knows, which is, that we all have layers of our identity. So, I think Obama will still get, I don't know if he'll get, I'm not a student enough to know if he'll get exactly the same number of black voters, but, we all have different pools of affiliation, and sometimes they seem to contradict. And so I think what's going on is that we're sort of, this is to come back to what we said in the beginning, is sort of a rewriting of the language that we use to talk about this stuff, because I think that there are people who are unaffiliated still have all kinds of moral and ethical and religious beliefs and practices and reasons that they vote when you really sit down and talk to people. But I think that's the language that has changed, and the organization. I mean, literally, when I was actually thinking, in the last few elections, going back, or say, starting with Bill Clinton, and then amplifying with Bush, where we had this faith outreach and this whole infrastructure that we now come to think is normal, and we're saying, oh my gosh, where is it? But it wasn't really like that so much before that period. There, you know, of course, that was because America was seen as being homogenous, and so people thought they could say God on Sunday, and everyone understood that they were talking about mainline Protestants, so they weren't talking about it for a different reason. But maybe we're in a different period of talking about religion, which is maybe something more subtle or maybe something less specific, because it's becoming, you know, more diverse country, and religious minorities are becoming, you know, more established and claiming their issues and having their own internal fights.
And do you think the parties have understood that? Is that why we perhaps have seen them not playing the God card quite so strongly?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have no idea, because I just started by saying I was so surprised this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is sort of the new normal. Because, you know, this is just a very diverse country and very religious country, a very spiritual country. So in a sense, it's kind of it's a little bit of a no-win at this stage for people to be too specific about their beliefs. I mean, even, you know, the Republicans had opportunities to nominate, you know, people who used much more traditional language about Christianity, and they opted not to.
Ansra, I want to turn to you. How has the Muslim community seen their role and the way people have played or not played the Islamic card in this election?
Well, what's really fascinating is in the 2000 election, many in the Muslim community went for President Bush. And so when the issue of, you know, 9/11 emerged and then the war on terror, they felt like they'd been betrayed. And so in the last election, then much of the Muslim community then went with Obama. And the latest statistics that I've seen is that about 80% of the Muslim vote is going to go to Obama, but yet they're sort of presenting it as, well, there's still another 20% that's up for grabs, and this could decide the election. So it's really interesting that they're trying to frame themselves as I think I see Michelle smiling, because I know it's really amusing, isn't it?
No, everybody says that, and it's all true, because everybody decides the election.
Right. So, you know, this like maybe 1 or 2% population of America is the one that's going to decide it. And I think the fact that even that they're in a place right now where they think that they can, or that they're going to at least put that message out, is indicative of sort of this new empowerment that even a minority group feels like they can have in an election today. But I think for the most part, the Muslim community feels like they haven't been directly engaged in this election, that a lot of the issues that they care about, that, you know, a lot of the Muslim organizations care about regarding tensions with others in the American community, American foreign policy, drones, all of these other, you know, big hot, you know, issues of dictators removed in the Middle East and all of this, like that they haven't emerged. These are the priorities that many in the Muslim community would like to see emerge. Issue of Palestinians and Israel, right? Like people just aren't going there.
And the
so
economy has been
overlooked.
just so dominant this time that people's concerns have obliterated those wider issues that were so important in 2008.
Yeah, and then those are a lot of the issues that are important to this Muslim community that is mostly diaspora, that's mostly from other countries, and that they care about. And, you know, tied into the Muslim issue, you know, to me, one of the wishes that I had from the candidates this year that I feel was lost, that reflects, I think, this point that we talked about, the spirituality of many Americans, is that I think that, you know, at the core, like in a lot of people's hearts and souls, there's a lot of hurting going on, both because of economics, both because of unresolved tensions, you know, from 9/11. There's, you know, strikes on you know, there was the attack on the Sikh temple. There's the Aurora shooting. Just things that are expressing themselves in the way of violence and hostilities. And those are things that I wish that the presidential candidates had actually been able to reach in a matter of healing for this country. That I think as long as we're talking about faith and religion, that I think, you know, have largely, that didn't go as far as it possibly could have gone.
An opportunity missed as far as the Muslim community is concerned, or minorities.
Yeah. but also our larger community too, our larger American community.
I've got a final question for all of you. So you've been living this election over the last few months, day in, day out. What is the one image that sticks in your mind? Maybe one that raises a smile, but a key image for you from all the coverage of this election.
Was it back in February or March, I think it was, when the self-appointed leaders of the religious right decided to go to Texas and endorse a candidate? They all got into a room and they came up with Rick Santorum was their guy. And he was going to be the standard bearer for the religious right. And that didn't go very far. And I just have this image in my head, maybe rightly or wrongly, but of all these sort of older, graying white men, and perhaps a few women, but gathered on this ranch outside of Houston, trying to, find the guy, and it was going to be a guy, who was going to carry their cause, and they ended up picking the wrong one.
So the white smoke went up out the chimney, and they got the wrong guy.
And so I don't know. I mean, it sort of leaves me with the impression that not that religious conservatives are a fading group, but that their leadership, or at least the leadership that we've always understood it, is shifting. And I think the idea that they had to coalesce and then they ended up coalescing around a loser was sort of telling.
Very interesting point, Kevin. And Michelle, what is the image that sticks out in your memory?
Well, I guess maybe there's a couple things. One, the image of the leader of the Catholic Church, Cardinal Dolan, who's been, sort of the face of this, very important, probably the biggest religious campaign that I can remember, having an event with Stephen Colbert, which the media was basically shut out of. But it just showed me, actually thought that it showed me that the Catholic Church, well, first of all, where our conversations happen. If you want to go talk to Americans, you go and have a conversation with Colbert. I couldn't get in it. We tried to get Cardinal Dolan to come to speak to the religion reporters. I'm trying to remember why he said he couldn't come, but anyway, so I think they're kind of, you have this massive, the largest religious institution in our country, the Catholic Church, possibly pivoting. Being, kind of finding that that the campaign that they had focused on this election about religious liberty didn't seem to be resonating in a traditional way.
Azra, finally, for you, what is the picture that sticks in your mind, maybe raises a smile from all this coverage?
Yeah, I have to say I've been smiling remembering this moment. I just saw it yesterday and welcome everybody to Google crying baby and Bronco Obama, where basically a little girl is crying and weeping and saying, I don't want to hear any more about Bronco Obama and Mitt Romney. I want this election to end. And I think, her tears, I can't even understand how this moment happened, if the parents set her up or what, but I thought it captured a lot of, the despair, perhaps even, frustration that folks are feeling at this point. And also the second thing that struck me is this sort of story that was out in just the background of the emergence over the last year, this chamomile tea party that's trying to basically bring things to normal, trying to sedate, trying to be a little bit of a sedative to all of the partisanship that's out there. Because I think, at the end, folks want some peace, and that's also, when you talk about religion and faith, that's what people try to seek. And I don't know if that was completely gotten from this election. And so that little girl reminds me of sort of the crying that we're all still doing, trying to get that peace out of the electoral process.
Well, it's a great image. It will end. I know there will be a November the 7th, and this will all be over. Michelle, Azra, Kevin, we've run out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights and your thoughts on this topic. You've been living it over the last few months, and it's great to have you with us. And it doesn't end here, because within hours of the election result being given out, we're back with another edition of Faith on the Record, and we'll be asking a very simple question. What happens now? See you then, and don't forget to vote.